So we were interested in, what are some of the different values that women may bring to the workplace? Did a big study, data study on similarities and differences in how men and women perceive, define, and pursue value in their work. And we found a lot of overlaps in terms of the joy of leading teams, a desire to be authentic, a wish to be recognized in the organization for what your real contributions were. But we found two significant differences that were replicable in different sectors over time. And the first was women were more likely to judge their satisfaction and their success based on their own benchmarks rather than competitively. And women were much more likely to report satisfaction based on the actual quality of their everyday experience, which included their ability to control their pace and their opportunity to create valuable, lasting, and satisfying relationships. So that it was money and position were certainly important, but money and position alone were not enough to make a woman feel passionately attached to and engaged by her position if she felt that the quality of her experience was negative or didn't really benchmark with what her own goals for herself were. And this really matters. And I think it particularly matters when we think about partnership firms and the attrition that's often happening with younger women in partnership firms, the high level of hiring that's happening, and then the attrition before partnership. Because when you think about it, when you think about the implications of this, one of the things you can see is that many organizations assume motivation based on what turn out to be male parameters. That is, they try to spur performance by ranking people, which gets their juices going, and it doesn't get women's juices going as much. And they assume that money and position will be a trade-off even for the most extreme demands. And it doesn't necessarily work that way for women. So we really need a much broader, more comprehensive, more sophisticated and integrated way of addressing the issue of motivation in organizations that is less male-centered than it has been. And I would suggest, especially for firms struggling with attrition, this is important. There was some fabulous research done by this woman, brain scientist at Yale. She was headed up a big lab. And one of the things she found is that there's a kind of a reverse U curve. And that men are tougher to motivate, but don't tip as easily into stress. Where women are not as hard to motivate, not as hard to get going, but they'll tend to tip at an earlier point into stress. And when you think about budgets in organizations, you can look at how much more is allocated to motivating employees than to helping them deal with stress. And this is really important stuff, because one of the things, I mean, our research showed it, but a lot of the more cutting edge research on age differences, like Tammy Erickson is doing, really shows that there's a much greater similarity in the younger cohort with how men and women value work in this way than at the older cohort. So I always say that organizations can learn to deal with this more integrated approach to what motivates employees, generally by learning to deal with it in terms of women. Any questions before we go on? Any thoughts about that? That motivation piece, that value piece, yeah.
So again, if you're dealing with the law.
Hold on for the mic. She's coming along.
So again, if you're dealing with law firm and this issue of continuing to incent women to stay and for the long haul and so forth, your point is to address their stress and also to give them feedback and a feeling that they're contributing and they're valuable and in other ways beyond simply they're making a lot of money.
Exactly. That recognizing and also taking a look at some extreme demands and recognizing that if you can't have a culture that begins to mitigate some of the extreme demands, you as a firm are going to continue to be hiring at 50, even 60%, going after those top women law school grads, but you're still going to have issues. And I would suggest, I mean, it's interesting because every book that you do kind of finds a market. And with a female vision, I've had much more work in law firms than I've ever had in my life. And I think that it's partly that law firms to some extent have been behind the curve. It's also partly that law firms are now getting pushback from clients about having too much male dominance in terms of the senior partners. But I think law firms are also at a time when some of the structure and cultural ways of operating, the fact that the rainmaker, the one who brings in business, that is valued so much more highly than the sort of finder, minder, and grinder paradigm, that the minder, there's a big turnover in clients now. So the minder role is more important and the grinder role is more important. It's not just finding that client may be gone. And the way that the compensation committees in law firms tend to look, they got there as rainmakers. That's what they want to see. So I think all that is going to be evolving in a very fascinating way as firms really recognize, hey, we're either going to be drawing from a very small pool of talent, we're going to be getting a larger proportion than we would like of second-tier law school graduates. We've got to figure out a way, and we'll be getting pushback from our clients. One of the most powerful moments of my last year was doing a program in Chicago for top 10 law firms, the senior women partners and the managing partner. And one of the things, they had a panel, and they had a woman who was from one of the probably 3 or 4 largest corporate clients of law firms in Chicago. And she said something, I'll never forget this, you could have heard a pin drop. She said, when I see 9 white guys walk into my office soliciting for a piece of business, here's what I say to them. We're doing everything we can to develop a talent base for the future. You're clearly not. Would you explain to me why I would benefit by working with you? Wow, well, that got their attention. That got their attention, yeah. So that pushback from clients is a lot more powerful than an abstract conversation about developing a talent base. And that's happening in Europe. I can tell you I did a lot of work in Scandinavian law firms this year. You're hearing the same thing from big corporate clients. They're out ahead, and I think that's really pushing the law firm thing. So it's a really fascinating time in terms of that. And that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic. That pushback, and then this knowledge, this understanding of some of the differences in motivation and the need to control pace. And you know what? That next generation, the men are going to have that desire too. We need to get on that.
And I don't believe in lockstep. I believe in meritocracy and a
Right.
contribution, and there should be a relationship. But embedded within that is the real concern that these things will now start,
Yeah.
prejudices, biases,
Right.
and so on, and exploiting that
Right.
very difference is now going to start impacting even the associate women's compensation.
Yes, and not to mention the partner, the 2-tier partner thing. Where the partner is and how they're compensated. So all that's changing as they try to adjust. And part of the impact there is real demotivation. So it's not, so I think especially in partnership firms, being able to have some of this language around motivational differences and to say, you know what, we need to be willing to look at the culture and the structure. This is not something that HR can take care of by having a couple recognition programs. This is very deep stuff, and we need to look at everything from compensation to what are the questions that are asked around the partnership and incorporate the succession hiring tables. So this is a big deal. You want to do this? You want to be in the position of sending those 9 guys, and it's amazing. I was working with a big technology manufacturer out in Chicago also, and the head of the company said, that none of this ever, I was okay, women, we're a tech company, fine, And he said, and I walked in, the purchasing agent from at IBM, the purchasing agent in Charlotte, African-American women. I walked in with 10 white guys, and I thought, oh, I get it. I see where the problem is. So it's real, and they're feeling the heat. So it's an opportunity to be able to present the idea that we need to rethink some of the cultural stuff here.